Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. A couple of housekeeping items. Yes, the session is being recorded. Yes, we'll send out a link to it. We'll also send a copy of the deck and some additional resources. Uh, um, got a full panel today. I'm going to start out with a little bit of introduction. My name is Ted Ritter. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. Been with the IT community of IFMA for over 15 years. And really, we've been trying to answer the same question. How does technology support CRA and FM really since its inception? And, what we're really after is collaboration and sharing best practices throughout the US and EMEA and Asia Pac and Africa. Really want to thank our members and our followers. We have grown exponentially since the pandemic in terms of our follower base. If you're interested in following us on LinkedIn, go ahead and click on the QR code. We do post a couple times a week, and it's a good way to stay in touch. I think in terms of, a lot of what we focus our time and resources on is creating resources that are useful to the association and the profession. We've got a resources page on our website, and you can find all manner of information about technology as it relates to FM and CRE. So please check that out as well when you get a chance. A couple of introductions. I'll start with passing it over to Susan Clark with Autodesk on why are we doing this?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me. So just as a short intro to myself, I'm Susan, based out of London, working on Autodesk's industry strategy for building operations. And alongside that, I've been a big advocate for a lot of the work done by the IFMA IT community. And more recently, I've been working with IFMA around the topic of building lifecycle management. And I'm sure we'll hop on to more of that later today. Just in terms of intros, I'll maybe now pass over to Erin to introduce herself.
Thanks, Susan. I'm Erin Sevitz. I head up content and customer marketing with Aptura. We are an intelligent work tech company. We work with about 45% of Fortune 500 companies around the world to help them optimize their workplace operations via things like visitor management, asset management and lifecycle planning, as well as workplace management. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. And prior to Aptura, I was on the IFMA staff for about 6 years. So really excited to have this conversation. I know the group of us has been talking about this for quite a while. And particularly, I know, Dean, you are very passionate about this. So I will pass over to you.
Thank you, Erin. So Dean Stanberry, I am the immediate past chair of IFMA's Global Board of Directors. I've been involved for quite some time, an FM practitioner myself, and also spent 22 years in IT before getting into real estate and facilities. And so the technology piece of commercial real estate is near and dear to my heart. And this topic in particular, data quality, data management, is one of the biggest challenges I think the FM industry and commercial real estate industry is facing right now. And last but not least, I'll toss it over to Marshall.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dean. My name is Marshall McFarland. I'm the immediate past president of the Greater Phoenix chapter of IFMA. Been in facilities management over a couple of decades. I think my passion lies in the operational end of facilities management, and of course, that includes data or the lack of it. So I'm excited to participate in this topic today.
Thanks for the introductions, everyone. Susan, do you want to share a little more about, how we approached developing this research paper?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to give a brief overview. So this research report that we recently published with the IFMA IT community around leveraging a digital threads to enhance FM is actually our second piece of research with the IT community. Our first piece of research really looked at why it is valuable to take a full lifecycle approach in building management. And in the second piece of research, we really wanted to get into the how. And what was very clear throughout initial piece of research is that data needs to become a much better connecting tissue across stakeholders and across phases of the building lifecycle. We need better sharing of data across stakeholders, departments, because today so much data is not passed on in the right format. So data is being lost and recreated. So to dig into this topic further, we decided to run a second piece of research based on expert interviews. So we interviewed over 25 experts from all dimensions of the building lifecycle, focused in architecture roles, engineering, construction, facilities, and technology. And we were really trying to identify through these deep discussions around data management, some actionable ideas that we could share back with the FM industry around how to improve data management, and in particular, the sharing of data across different stakeholders across the life cycle.
I think the insights of doing it this way and actually getting people off the cuff.
Yes.
It was like we didn't give them a chance to come up with the answers. I think we got a lot of honest input from those that participated. In terms of what is a digital thread? I know we had some people say, "What is a digital thread?" That were considering to join us today. Would you like to share how you view digital threads? I know you said why it's important, but
so really the top finding from this second piece of research was a concept called a digital thread. Could be a very useful framework to help improve the flow of data across stakeholders across the building lifecycle. In terms of what is a digital thread, I guess from my perspective, this is not a single thing or single technology. Rather, this is an approach or trend of using digital workflows and data sharing to start tracking assets through their full life cycle. And within our research, we kind of came onto the point that a digital thread is very multi-dimensional. And we identified 4 S's that make up a digital thread. One is stakeholders, one is around skills, one is around standards, and one is around smart solutions. And it's really the combination of those different pillars that help to build a digital thread, which is about kind of passing data through the whole building life cycle, not just one direction, but bi-directionally. And folks from the UK may also be familiar with this concept under a slightly different phrase, which is the golden thread.
wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Susan. You'd asked me to change the slide to why now about an hour ago. So why now?
Yes. Why now? So I'm sure many people are kind of sitting, listening to this webinar, thinking about kind of why are we bringing up this topic today? We have been talking about data interoperability for over 2 decades across AECO. Kind of as you can see here, to date, it's largely been a topic that's been widely discussed, but largely unaddressed. Often due to insufficient stakeholder motivation. I think what we found through our research is whilst some of these challenges have not fallen away, we do see change drivers accelerating. And there's really 2 of those. I'll just quickly highlight them. I think what we're seeing today within FM and across the broader industry is more emphasis on data-driven and AI-driven approaches. And this effectively does depend on better data transfer across the AECO industry. And then the second change driver, and we'll hear much more about this later today, is we are seeing more momentum around this topic of building lifecycle management. So we're seeing more players across AECO become increasingly interested in managing buildings or assets as more of a lifecycle concept, and kind of broadening their view beyond their traditional focus area. So yes, what I think, whilst this is in many ways an old topic, we definitely see kind of new interests and new ideas kind of reinvigorating it.
Susan, if I can just dig into that a little bit more, because I think the point about AI is extremely important. And first of all, we've been at a point where we have now collectively gathered such an incredible volume of data. I think I've seen stats that just between 2018 and 2023, the volume of data in AEC firms has increased sixfold, right? So this massive proliferation of the volume of data, but particularly with AI coming in now, it's kind of causing a tipping point with all of this, because you simply cannot leverage AI solutions if you've got all of this data but no insights from it, right? It's unstructured, it's incomplete data. So I just wanted to double click on, I guess, the AI portion of the why now statement.
Appreciate that, Aaron. Yes, what are we doing about it? How do we action things? We'll get into a general discussion here in just a minute, but we'd love to have some opinions from the audience. We've got our first poll coming up, so let's see what's going on. We'll give it another moment or two. Let's see how completely confident our audience is. I can't wait. 0. Well, you've come to the right place. I'm glad we've got about half of the audience that's somewhat confident, and that's helpful. Thanks for participating in that, for sure. So we've got about 45 minutes left, and we could probably talk about this for, to the end of the day and happy hour. But want to start out with a general question. We'll see whoever wants to pick it up. Was, when do you think operations should get involved in the design and construction process?
Project kickoff.
Go ahead, Dean. Right at kickoff?
Well, there's reasons for that. So first things first, you need to make sure that at project kickoff, the expectation is set for the data that you want to extract from that project over to operations at the completion of the project. And whether that's 6 months or 2 years, if you're not setting the expectation up front, then that's a problem.
Marshall, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with Dean that at project kickoff, in the case of new builds, we're starting one now, even with site selection and those kind of things. But yeah, I think at project kickoff, as Dean said, we set the expectations of what data we need and why we need it. So if we have to modify how we transmit that or communicate that there's a context associated with it. Yeah, so I think at project kickoff, through design, through turnover, and then obviously into operating and maintaining the building.
Aaron, what are your thoughts? You're nodding yes.
Well, I mean, I think probably universally, we're all going to say at the beginning, as early as possible in the process, right? I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, because I think the important counterpart to this question is the why. So if we want to jump into that now, or come back to that.
Go for it.
Okay. So I personally, and for those who haven't read the report, I really encourage you to take a look at it. One of my favorite stats from the report said that about 2/3 of the interviewees took over 2 hours in wasted time looking for operational or facility data. And that aligns very much with what we've seen at Aptura. We also conduct an annual research report. So we talked to about 200 operational leaders globally this year. And they really said that they struggle to gather insights because they've got multiple dashboards, multiple siloed systems. 37% of them said that they are using 11 or more full-time employees just focused on analyzing the data that they get from all of these different operational systems. And over half of them were using on average 17 or more different systems to manage all of this information. And they may not have even been including some of the systems like just going to Excel spreadsheets and paper models. Those are just the technologies they're using. So it's immensely important that we get involved at the very, very early stages of any project and maintain involvement along the way across all the different stakeholders, because you can see those operational challenges that occur as a result of not doing that.
Aaron, I'd like to add to that the 11 people doing the analyzing, my guess is that they're actually only a small portion of their time is actually spent doing analyzing. The rest of it is cleaning the data, rationalizing the data, reconciling it against the 17 different sources of data so that they're talking apples to apples. So yeah, there's a lot of the issues today have to do with where the data is not defined the same way, and because of a lack of data governance and any sort of consistent data management processes, the data quality is not there.
Susan, you watched or conducted all of the interviews, and some of them you watched twice. Is there anything else that you recall that someone said about why operations should be at the table at the beginning of the project?
On the why parts, two big themes came out. So the first theme, before we even get to data, people were kind of emphasizing that actually kind of facilities management and operations are kind of almost fountains of knowledge when it comes to trying to understand the future needs of a building, whether that's the operational needs or kind of maintenance and asset needs. So it is important to bring these stakeholders to the table much earlier than is standard practice today. We actually heard on our first piece of research with the IFMA IT community that 80% of facility managers report they're not consistently involved in the design and construction process of new projects within their organization. So that's indicating some gap. The second theme and kind of second why, and we've already spoken about this, is we do need facilities folks to have a much stronger voice at the start of projects to articulate what data they want and in what format. So I think there's general consensus to that. Look, I did hear some different opinions along the way. Some people were pushing back around whether FM should be kind of included in a strong way during the design process. Kind of the pushback was the practical reality is this is a department with very limited time. Can they allocate enough time to have a meaningful impact across design and construction? So I think the people want that to happen, but there was more of a question around, is this practical to kind of drive programmatically?
If I could add one more thought. Yeah, if I could add one more thought about the why. It's so utterly apparent to me, and I'm a pretty passive person, but I want to jump up and down on the desk and scream this, because the to the points about data aside, what other product or thing in our world do we build or design that doesn't have operator input? And like we wouldn't dream of designing and building cars without talking to drivers or the people that operate them. So we've all been in focus groups for very consumer products where they analyze to death how that product's going to be used to come up with the best product for the market, and not including the people who are going to operate the building, which are getting more complex by the day. To me, is almost counterintuitive why you wouldn't or couldn't. So,
Well said. Marshall, I'm going to stay with you for a minute. One of the things you said in your interview was, it doesn't do us a lot of good to get, you know, 20 gigabytes of PDFs and manuals. And even though that may satisfy the construction contract, it doesn't do you any good at all as an operator. So, um, what data do you need? And part of that inclusion of operations at the beginning of the process is defining what that data looks like and when it's received. So, Marshall, when should you start receiving data from the construction team?
during design, I think. So we understand the design expectations and the parameters that were expected when things are operating as they should, what those should look like, and start planning for those. And then when we come into the data sets, I think there's kind of two categories for me. One is the data we need to operate the building effectively, and then the other would be in alignment with our company's goals and our department's goals. So if there's certain KPIs we want to meet through our work order system or that kind of thing, um, what are those data sets that we need, whether it's equipment life or repair statistics, and then just the data we need to operate the buildings, whether those are O&M manuals or preventive maintenance requirements or those kinds of things.
So not wait to the very end and have some input. Dean, you were nodding affirmatively. You're agreeing with Marshall. Yes. What would you add on to that in terms of how to create the definition to get the data that's useful?
Yeah, there's an epiphany that we had here in the last little bit. Some of this came from some work I did at GSA as well. We talk about getting FM or operations to the table at like project kickoff, but in many cases that's too late because you're sitting down at the table with an architect, an engineer, and a general contractor. They already have contracts in place. And guess what? Their contracts have nothing in it for you. And that is one of the pervasive things we're seeing is that the contracts themselves don't specify delivering structured data to operations. It'll be very vague. It'll say deliver, a package. And that package ends up being that one PDF with 500 documents crammed into it. So the change that needs to occur, this is part of an incentive problem at the very, very, very front end of, contract templates, is we need to fill those deliverables out. So yes, I agree with Marshall. We should be reviewing data and documentation during the design process, but it should be spelled out. I want to look at a submittal, to use construction terminology, a submittal that gives me information at 30% design, 60% design, 100% design, 60% construction, and then get everything should be turned over at substantial completion, not project closeout. And so for those not familiar, that's also why we need to learn the construction terminology, because those are the things that we want to see. We want to see milestones, and the contracts must have performance penalties in them for not doing these things. And it has to be substantial enough to get the contractors and the architects and engineers' attention. So putting a $10,000 penalty on a multi-million-dollar contract doesn't get anybody's attention. That will get ignored. And nobody gets penalized for it other than saying, yeah, you can keep your 10 grand. So it needs to be material.
Material. I'm going to come back to that in terms of, retention and how it might be applied to what we're talking about today. So, what we've seen from both research papers and a lot of conversations and what we continue to hear from the marketplace is we have an incomplete and imperfect process. Data does get turned over, not necessarily the way it's best beneficial for operations. So, if it's poorly structured, incomplete, what kind of issues are there? Aaron, you've looked at that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we talked about all these different handover points, all these different potential ways to receive data. But when it's unstructured, when it's incomplete, when it's poorly structured, you essentially have no baseline or benchmark to be able to start your decision-making process. Someone that I presented last year at World Workplace with, we talked about this issue. We were talking about digital threads and data as well. And they basically, this was a business, a pharmaceutical manufacturer who grew very, very quickly through a lot of merger and acquisition activity. So, right, they're inheriting parts of their portfolio as well as engaging in new builds. And so they didn't have a clue where to start, right? They didn't know where the information existed, how to even start their data collection process. But once you get that audit done and you get your overall data, you're still often stuck with this problem of, again, going back to poorly structured data. So this could mean anything from naming conventions, right? Super simple example of calling areas within a building, different buildings, different floors, space types, calling them different names. Could be 10 different names or more. And so you can't start to analyze information, make decisions on that if everything is called something different. So even things that often get ignored, like naming conventions, are really, really important to this process. And the reason they're important is because if you are missing a standard, a consistent standard across the board for that information once you've gathered it, you lack the ability to identify patterns or trends across the board. So no matter what your goal is, right? If you're talking about how can I get better life out of my building assets? How can I improve space utilization? What is my real occupancy, right? All of that kind of information and the promise of being able to apply and leverage AI to make recommendations about what to do. None of that can function if you don't have that data standard and consistency built in, and you make sure you're not missing data across the board, which is a very, very tall ask.
Just give a practical example of Aaron's comment there. In architecture, in many cases, the architect uses the term levels of a building, level 1, level 2. If you're doing a renovation on an existing building, odds are those are called floor 1 and floor 2. So if you're extracting data out of the design and it all says level 1 and 2, you have a naming inconsistency right there. And there's ways around that, but in most cases, that's some of the things you need to establish right up front, is saying, in the design process, you can call it whatever you want, but when you go to export that, we need to make sure that it is exported using the terminology of the building. We're not going to redo all the signage in the building because we renovated one floor and you called it level 3.
Well put. Susan, any follow-up thoughts on definitions and the importance of structuring data?
Yes, so it's clearly something that's very important. And what we're seeing today is actually a lot of data from the design, engineering, and construction process is not being reused in operations. So there's a huge loss in the industry. And I think it's not because data isn't being passed over. I think, as we've discussed, the data is not being passed over in a suitable or structured format for operations. So unfortunately, what I hear about very often is a lot of project data can be handed over to the owner operator, but it's not suitable. So the owner operator will go off and actually recreate a lot of their asset data. So it can mean after a new project is handed over, instead of having data kind of ready to go from day one, there's a 6-month process in trying to kind of go around and resurvey the assets. So if we can find a way to kind of improve this data standardization or data translation between phases, you can really see the potential there to kind of better reuse data that's already been produced.
Easier said than done. How do we fix this? How do, Dean, I'm going to come back to you, and it's 10 grand's not going to cut it. We can provide better definitions. We can say, we need Kobe data in the structure and, deliver it incrementally here, but how do we get them to actually do it? How big of a financial lever do we need?
Well, that's kind of project by project. I think it's just the financial, I guess, financial potential penalty has to be material enough for that project that the contractors are not going to ignore it. But it also requires enforcement, and that goes back to the project managers. If you have someone that is not going to enforce those deliverables or selectively ignores them, that's a different problem. So when we look at the more systemic issues, we're not constrained by technology. We have standards. Standards exist for most of these things. We're not effectively using them. Right down to maybe not to some of the levels of naming convention, but a lot of the categorization, classification, those kind of things that we can leverage in a lot of these tools already exist. But I'll just, many people have heard me say this, commercial real estate slept through the first 30 years of digital transformation, woke up about 5 years ago. Now, part of the consequence of that is that when you look across the entire commercial real estate industry, there's a very low level of technology skills and experience. That includes data and data analytics and data management. So historically, it's a bricks and mortar business, right? And what information you needed, people just sort of made it up as they went along. If you look in most maintenance management system, they'll have an asset tag. That asset tag doesn't follow any sort of industry standards we're familiar with. It's somebody made it up. And that's what carried forward for the last 30, 40 years or however long it is. So we have to upskill the industry so that we understand how we should be doing some of these things. And we have to encourage people to say, well, some of the older methods that we've used, we need to abandon. We need to, bring it into the 21st century so that whatever we called that asset and whatever attributes we gave it in the design and construction are those same things that we're using going forward. And whether it's a maintenance management system or a portfolio planning system or a space planning system, the building or the floor or the room needs to be the same object in every one of those systems. And you only do that when you have that consistency of naming and classification.
I'm glad you brought up the skill set component, Dean. That's definitely something else that came out of our research recently. We asked these operational leaders, many of whom are part of the corporate real estate community what their top barrier was to implementing AI. And the top response was the lack of employee skill set to properly implement and or leverage it for operational use cases. Lack of skill set is something we've been talking about in FM for years and years, but I think it's particularly applicable to this conversation about data, because it's yes, skill set to apply AI, but equally applicable to the skill set to understand all of these key themes that we're talking about that are so necessary for getting the data component right as well.
Marshall, we've been talking about skill sets needed to shift the paradigm for quite some time. What are your thoughts on given the environments you've dealt with, whether it's financial sector or biomedical campus, public sector, on how to develop those skill sets and how to pay for them?
Yeah, I think and facilities as a profession is not without sin and all this kind of situation we find ourselves in. And we've talked organizationally for a long time about how we haven't done a good job of demonstrating our importance and getting a seat at the table and those kinds of things. But then I think we do ourselves a disservice, and I used to tell my staff is when somebody finally asks you your opinion, that's not the time to say I don't know. So I think we need to be equipped. We need to do some self-lobbying to make our relevance known, which is counterintuitive to many of us who were raised in kind of this quiet professionalism, kind of attitude. But I think one of the things that struck me, one of the comments was the facilities managers aren't at the table because they don't have time, and I think it kind of starts with that. I call that we're too sick to take our medicine, and we have to make time. We have to prioritize, whether it's skill sets for employees. We talk about BIM and things like that. When I do get BIM data, I'm the only one who knows how to use it. So where maybe my HVAC supervisor is the one who really needs to look at the BIM data, or my mechanical supervisor. So I think being frank with ourselves about the kind of the state of our industry, and we're always seem to be lagging behind, whether we're almost like the little brother kind of syndrome, where we're always we don't have a seat at the table, then we get a seat at the table, we're not equipped to kind of provide the information we need, and then when we get that, then we're we're understaffed and overwhelmed, and we don't have time to do this. And I think just kind of doing some advocacy within our own profession to make time for these things and make them the same priority that other professions do in regards to learning these things and being equipped to implement them. With all these discussions on data, what was going through my head is, if you had the standardized data delivered in the ideal format and it was all that you wanted, is that just going to sit on the metaphorical shelf somewhere, or is that department going to use that the way, if we ran into data nirvana and got everything we wanted, how many facilities organizations could actually utilize that information the way it was intended? And I think it kind of starts with ourselves, and we need to look within and do a lot of self advocacy.
Well put. I'm seeing everybody nod and smile a little bit. So, Susan, follow up to that. Any thoughts on how we can help affect change?
Yeah, so actually I really liked Marshall's points around kind of looking within this industry. Sometimes when we talk about the challenge of kind of pushing data across the building lifecycle, sometimes a lot of the blame falls with the contractor, which is partly true, but I do believe all parties should take some accountability. And if we think about FM and operations, they're actually, based on the interviews that I ran for this study, kind of two success strategies that I saw that I can walk this group through. But it really felt that it was the operations teams that were more proactive rather than reactive had a better chance of getting good quality data after a project closes. So I'll just walk you through these two strategies. The first one is around, I call it knocking on doors, but effectively, one of the facility managers that I spoke to spoke about pushing themselves onto projects. So they would look at kind of new construction or renovation taking place across their kind of large facility. And rather than waiting to be invited into a project as a participant, they would be very proactive and start knocking on doors and inviting themselves in. And actually, one other interviewee that I spoke to working kind of in the healthcare sector took a similar approach. And they would come to meetings, and rather than be positioned kind of as the receiver of information or the receiver of the project, they kind of position themselves as the most important stakeholder. They are the facility team, the operations team that will be with this asset for a long time. So they really use that to try to kind of re-emphasize the importance of their perspective. And then the second kind of success strategy that I took out of this piece of research, again, it's about proactive approach. So I spoke about the knocking on doors. The second piece is about data standards. And I spoke to Seattle Airport, and they had said they spent a lot of time initially defining organization-wide asset data standards. But that's not enough. They need to be proactive in implementing them. So the facility team would try to, as we were hearing from Dean, get this represented within contractual language for project deliverables. But that's not enough. They have to be proactive in supporting the quality check of data at different delivery points. And I'll just share a specific quote from Seattle Airport. And they said, proactive management prevents costly rework associated with reactive processes. So it's almost like kind of for every hour you spend being proactive, is there an opportunity, I don't know, to save 5 hours later down the line, trying to kind of reformat, remake, reproduce data. So I think, yeah, there's a lot that this industry can drive themselves in terms of making change and get better outcomes.
If I can follow up on that just briefly, you know, one of the, we keep hearing, you know, that we need the FM at the table. Well, what we need at the table is operations. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the facility manager themselves. So it's part of the organizational structure and what roles and responsibilities you have. For example, MIT has a role of an individual that's their turnover manager. Their job is, they're in operations, but their job is to participate in the construction projects and to make sure that all of the operation deliverables are being met as that project goes along, and that at substantial completion, they're going to get all of the data they need. Now, that's an example of an institutional owner, somebody who owns a lot of property, does their own construction projects, has their own internal operations team. When you think about like a new construction, a developer decides to build a building, they don't even know who's going to own it yet. So there's no operations person. But that means we need consultants in the industry that can basically represent the operations role. That needs to be a role on that project team, even if it's brought in as a third party. And their role is to represent the interests of operations in getting that structured data defined, so that when the building is sold, they have something to turn over to the new owner and that operations team in a structured, ready to work with format.
Excellent. Aaron, you see a lot different uses, and you've been thinking about this a long time. Before we move ahead and do our final poll and go through some resources and wrap up conversation, what's gone well? Give us some positive news, an example where it's like, hey, everything worked.
Well, I think the positive examples tend to follow a lot of the characteristics that we've been talking about that are necessary to make this happen, right? So we work with a government healthcare provider organization, and they had existing clinics and healthcare facilities, and they had no information on them. So they went through a process back in 2013 to sit through going through all the mapping in their building. So they've got the BIM models, but I really liked, Susan, the point about not letting that information sit on the shelf. And it is incumbent on the operator to then maintain that data. You cannot just expect this handover of that nirvana of you finally got the perfect information at handover. Pretty much day two of operation, right? That information starts to get out of date. Exactly, right? Huge drop off. It's like driving a car off of the lot. So that organization prioritized making sure they had someone, and not just one person, but multiple staff members responsible for maintaining that data. And what that allowed them to do was, it's healthcare. So they are prioritizing patient care, and every single department across the organization was saying, we need more space. Radiology doesn't have enough patient rooms, right? More space, more space, more space. And so they went through and did proper utilization study on everything. And they found out one random example, one room was being used solely to show x-rays. So like 30 minutes once or twice a week. That's all that room was ever used for. So they said, okay, why don't we convert this into a transfusion treatment space? We can now provide patient care, right? We're making much better use of the space. All of that came because, right, they went through the process to get the data they needed. They made sure they had the right people trained on maintaining that data. They applied it to start analyzing the information, and then they were able to actually get efficiencies out of all of that labor leading up to that. There are tons of other examples like this, but I really like the focus because so much of this conversation we focus on it's AEC that needs to do the work to fill this gap. And it is heavily an operational piece to make sure that they are maintaining, keeping the standards consistent, keeping the information up to date. And then it's also going back to that project kickoff phase to getting the operators into the procurement stage. So it's really got to be connected all the way around.
What you're describing is essentially data governance practices too. To use some of the data governance terminology, you have data stewards, which have a certain specific role, and data custodians. Data custodians are effectively anybody that is inputting new information or updating existing information, has a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that it is complete, accurate, and timely. That means training anyone who is touching any of these systems what their data custodian responsibilities are. And then having the tools and methodologies in place to audit that on an ongoing basis to make sure that the data that is being input and updated in these systems meets your data quality requirements. And that's something that doesn't happen very often. When you said, we can get the data, all of the right data the first time out of construction, but if we don't have those mechanisms in place to assure that it is kept current going forward, it absolutely will decline and it will become not trustworthy. And then all the systems that use it are no longer trustworthy either.
Well put. I think we're going to run our next poll. Let's see what everyone has to say. This should be interesting. Funny how the conversation just led perfectly into these set of questions. And give it another few seconds.
Well, you're waiting for that, the point is that the problems we have are not related to technology. It's people and process. That's, the reason we have these issues is because humans are involved.
Oh, interesting set of answers. We'll definitely share all this with everyone that registered as well. But from none to continuous. Well, we've got a hefty middle, and we'll definitely look at what the elite is doing and what best practices we can learn. See if I can get the slides advanced. So not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is something actually that came out of our first cycle, but we had so many people say, what do we do? And we have a longer version of this that we'll send out, and I think some additional links to resources. But this was put together by one of the active participants with the last year's initiative. So we thought we'd share it for sure. Going to get to Q&A. Questions coming in, but wanted to turn it over to Dean to talk about the Building Lifecycle Management Initiative.
Thank you. So this is something new. Actually, Susan and I have a long history on this. IFMA and Autodesk recently co-founded this Building Lifecycle Management Initiative. So basically, it is an entity that we put together, and the whole purpose is to promote lifecycle thinking and to start addressing some of these gaps, I would call them, between the silos within the commercial real estate industry, breaking down those silos, bringing the stakeholders together, and then looking for some of the areas where we may have some pieces missing in the framework. And a lot of it is about data interoperability. It's not about the technologies or the standards. It's we don't have the interoperability well defined to make sure that data flows seamlessly, frictionlessly across the building lifecycle. So we have a website. There's information on there. There's actually a paper. If you go to the resources section, there's a paper about the contract deliverables, the AEC contract deliverables issue that's in there. And there's some other things. We also have even a self-assessment. We have a maturity model that says, how mature are you in your practices? And there's a self-assessment quiz that you can take, and you will receive sort of an AI augmented report that tells you, here's where you stand in your maturity, and here's some things that you might do to improve, move on to get to the next level. So all of the contact information is down there as well. And it's on LinkedIn. It's got a company page on LinkedIn. And you can subscribe for updates on the website. Go down to the bottom of the homepage. There's a little link. You can just put in a name and an email address. And as we put out information, you'll be on the distribution list for that. Susan, anything you want to add?
Maybe a bit of a call to action for this group. This is a new initiative. We're very much looking for your input, support. So please get in touch if you want to get involved, even as an occasional contributor, or join us in one of our regular syncs.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. We'll send the entire deck out. I would encourage you to go check it out. It is new. to be sure, but it's very much worthwhile, I think, for us all to be paying attention to. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A. We've got some questions. Martin, this is going to probably eat up the rest of our time. Let's ask our participants today on what's the best way to upskill the profession to be able to actually take advantage of positive change. Marshall, I'll start with you. We may have lost Marshall. So what can we do to upskill the profession?
Well, I think for most organizations, the first step is to understand where people are. IFMA does have like a little self-assessment quiz, but it's targeted mainly towards the FM profession. Most organizations probably need to have at least a little assessment about what's important to that organization, and then what level of skill are the people, your personnel, should they have at whatever role they have within the organization, and then start defining, how do you meet that particular responsibility, that role and responsibility level of skills and experience. I'll go back to the data one. FM has a notoriously low level of data literacy. And so how do you measure that? Well, I wrote a 3-article series, and those shameless self-promotion here. It's on IFMA's FMJ. You can go in and look for the data literacy, and it goes through everything from the very basics through data management and up through data governance. But on the knowledge library, there's actually there's some additional content that we put in there, and one of them is like a self-assessment quiz that somebody might take and manipulate or manage for their own organization. So there's some things that you can do there, but it really does take organizations understanding what is necessary in order to be successful in their own company, and take ownership of that, and then make sure that you're making sure that people get training. As we all know from history, when budgets get tight, the first thing to cut is training. And that's not a good thing if you're expecting people to perform and get more productive.
Thank you, Dean. Before we run our exit poll, Susan, would you like to share some closing thoughts? Thank you, and Autodesk and Aptura for support, sponsorship, collaboration with both the IT community and IFMA.
Of course. I just want to say thank you to all of our attendees for coming along. Clearly, building lifecycle management is a very important topic, particularly as we think about how can we manage our buildings in a more sustainable way. So I think taking this broader lens to managing buildings will be kind of very valuable to all of us going forward.
Thanks to everybody that attended. Thanks to our subject matter experts today. And Chris, do you want to go ahead and run our final poll? Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your week. We appreciate you. Bye now.